Good morning, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be learning the 4th chapter in Rambam in the laws of idol worship. Now, I'm going to tell you like this. Today's Rambam is a very interesting Rambam. It's a little bit different than what we're regularly used to. The Rambam over here is discussing a very interesting law. And the Torah tells us as follows. The Torah says that if we find that there is a city in the land of Israel where we find that most of the city has gone and there were 2 people who have led them astray, at least 2 people. They have come and they have led astray the entire city to go and serve idols. That city is to be destroyed. Everyone is supposed to get killed. The whole city is supposed to be burnt down and destroyed to the ground and never be rebuilt. And it's a very strong law, which is a important law in regards to our belief in God. God tells us that we are not allowed to serve idols. We are only allowed to believe in one God. And if we have a city in the land of Israel, in the place, instead of believing in God, they are now believing in other gods, so that city is not allowed to be existent. So of course there has to be only the high court is allowed to give that final decision, and they have to look into it very clearly to make sure that it's true what they are hearing. And there are a few mitzvahs involved over here. Number 1, the idea that no one is allowed to proselytize amongst the masses. We have the mitzvah of burning this city, never to rebuild it, and we're also not allowed to benefit from any of the spoil of that city. So it's a very individual mitzvah in the regard that there is no other mitzvah which is like this, because over here we make the city becomes an entity of one city, where we're looking at everyone as one entity. When we see that the whole city has been serving idols, so then they become one entity of an idol worshipping city, and then everyone gets destroyed. And the truth is that the Talmud has a discussion if this ever even happened, if ever such a thing took place, if there ever was such a case in the land of Israel where it took place. And there's an argument in the Talmud, and but there is an opinion that it never even took place and this ever came to fruition. It was just something which is studied about. But this is a law in the Torah in regards to a city that has been led astray. So the Rambam tells us that if we have a city which is of Jewish people, and they were led astray by at least 2 men who have come and proselytized to the inhabitants, and they have gone and worshipped false gods, and they are inhabitants of the city. In other words, these people who are coming and trying to lead them astray, they live there. So then that city is totally destroyed. And it has to be a mid-sized city, not a small village which is less than 100 people, not a large city where you have most of one of the tribes of the Jewish people living there, so that would be a big size, but rather it's a middle-sized town, and everyone, or at least most of the people, were led astray and started worshipping idols. And in such a case, that's when the entire city is destroyed. But if it was not most of the people, it was just a few people, maybe half or maybe less than half, so then in such a case, we would then take those people who served idols and we would take them to the court, and then they would punish them as what is meant, how they're meant to be punished. But to make a city, and in Hebrew it's called a Ir Hanidachat. Ir means a city, Hanidachat means that was led astray. So a city that was led astray, in other words, becoming this new entity of being called a Ir Hanidachat, would only be if most of the city, and according to all the details that we mentioned before, were to take place. And only the high court in Jerusalem is able to define if the city is actually an Ir Anidachat, a city that was led astray. But a small court, just anywhere else in Israel, would not have the authority to be able to actually decide and say if this is the case or not. Only the Supreme Court has the right to say such a strong and harsh ruling. Continuing on, the Rambam gives us some other, I would say, parameters, so to speak, of what is able to be a city, which is called an Ir Anidachat, a city that was led astray, and what is not. So there are certain areas that are not able to become such a city. For instance, a city of refuge, where there are people who are seeking refuge in that city is not able to become an Ir Anidachat. Similarly, Jerusalem is not, because it wasn't split up to the tribes, so therefore it is a city that cannot become a city that was led astray, an Ir Anidachat. Similarly, a city that was on the border of Israel, it does not become an Ir Anidachat, because one of the mitzvot over here in regards to the city that gets destroyed is that we're not allowed to rebuild it, and we want the borders to be staying built and staying inhabited. The city will only be liable and become a state of an Ir Hanidachat, the city that was led astray, only in a case where the people who are trying to lead them astray, these people who are proselytizing, they will come and say, let us go and worship. In other words, they're coming and saying it in a plural way, including themselves within, and they're saying, let us go and serve these other gods, or let us go and bow down to a certain god, etc. But if not all of these specific ideas and these specific components took place, so then it would just be as if single people who have served idols, and then they would get killed in the high court. But again, their things are not getting destroyed. They go to their inheritors, and it would just be as any other person who has done it singly. So how does this work? How does it actually work practically? So we have the judge. So we have people who are seeing what's going on in this city. So the Supreme Court would send emissaries to this town, and they would start doing their investigations, and they would probe until they have established clearly that the proof that the entire city, or the majority of its inhabitants, have turned to worship false gods. And so first of all, they try to get them to repent, and they tell them this is what's going to happen. If you don't repent, the city is going to get destroyed. Go back, turn back to God. Don't go after false idols. And they send sages and people to come and try to convince them to come back to the right way. If we see that they're not interested and they're not repenting, so then what happens is they send the army to that city, and they wage war with them, really, and they start going through and setting up small courthouses within the city and deeming to see if most of the city has been serving idols or only partially. If they see that only part of the city has done it, so then they will take them to the high court and deal with them over there in Jerusalem. But if they see now that most of the city has been serving idols, so then every living creature in that city is killed, everything is burned down, and the city is left to be in shambles, and it's never to be rebuilt, and the whole city is burnt down. If there were some righteous people who were not there serving idols, so then their possessions are not going to get destroyed, but my bad. Righteous people who were not serving idols, their items will still get burnt in it, because the fact that they were living in such a terrible city where everyone was serving idols, so then it does get destroyed, as it says in the verse that nothing should be left in your hands from the spoils of what was destroyed. In other words, we are not allowed to have any possession. We're not allowed to have any enjoyment from the possessions of the people from this town. And everything has to get destroyed. Now, what happens if after they have started and they've destroyed the city, now they find out that the people who came and witnessed and were witnesses for that this city is a town where people are serving idols, turn out that they were lying and it was not true. And now all these people were killed in vain and all these possessions were destroyed. So first of all, those people, those witnesses are going to get killed. But besides for that, we are then allowed to have enjoyment from the things of the city, because it actually was not a city that was entirely serving idols. In other words, if someone took something not allowed, so then he would now be allowed to enjoy it. And it says that we're not allowed to rebuild the city that was led astray, and most of the city was serving idols, but we are allowed to make it into a garden because that's not a city. Now, what about a person who was coming through the city and they lived there and they were serving idols along with the rest of the people, but they were only there for a short time? So the Rambam says if they were there for 30 days, so then they are counted as if they live and they're part of the city. But if not, so then they're just like an individual. And if other people had things and that they lent to inhabitants of that city, so then those things would go back to their owner and they will not get destroyed. On the other hand, if they have something, if something from that city was lent to someone else outside of the city, so then they can leave it and they don't have to destroy it. And so it's only things that are within the city that belong to the city. So for instance, but what happens if you have like an animal, which half of the animal belongs to the city and half of it belongs to someone outside of the city? There's a partnership over here. So the Rambam says that the animal, because it does belong to the city and it's found within the city, even though it's only partially belonging, it will get killed. But if you have like a doe or something that is able to be split, so then you split it and part of it will go back to the partner who belongs to another city. Now, if you have an animal, for instance, if there's a cow that belongs to someone in the city of the Ir Anidachet, of the city that was led astray, and you say, oh my God, this animal is going to get killed, let's kill it, let's slaughter it, and then maybe we can eat from its meat. So the Rambam says that the Torah clearly spells out for us that we're not allowed to have any enjoyment from it, and therefore we're not allowed to have any enjoyment from this animal. On the other hand, hair, human hair, is something which is not included within this, and we are allowed to have enjoyment from the hair that was left over from the people in that city. Unless it's like a wig or something like that, so then that would not be allowed. If you have, and the general rule is like this, something which was connected to its life source. So for instance, if you have a tree with fruit growing on the tree, so you're allowed to have enjoyment from that fruit because since it is connected to its source, so therefore it's allowed. Similarly in here, the same idea. If you have the trees themselves are also allowed to be enjoyed because again they are connected to the ground, they are connected to their source. And then animal, on the other hand, since it's not connected to the ground, it's not connected physically to its source, so therefore it would be rendered differently. If you have animals that are belonging to the temple, in other words, if it was a firstborn animal or so on, or the tithe that a person was supposed to give as a gift to the temple, they do get destroyed along with that, even though they belong to the temple. Again, any form of a tithe, or the first tithe, or the second tithe, or any holy books, all that is going to be not allowed to be used, and we're going to either bury it if it's something which is holy, for instance, a holy book, Torah books, and so on. So that would be buried and discarded in a nice way. And again, we're not allowed to have any enjoyment from it. The Rambam finishes off this chapter and says that the idea of giving a judgment to an Ir Nidachat, to a city that was led astray, is actually a very special thing. Because if we have a city which is totally going against God, so having that city being taken away and destroying it is taking away the anger of God on the Jewish people, and it's as if they brought a sacrifice to God, and it will bring blessing and mercy upon, first of all, the people that were in that city. That is the way that they're going to have their atonement, so to speak, for what they did, and for the Jewish people in general. As it says, He will grant you mercy, He will deal mercifully with you, and will make you flourish. So that is the chapter today where we're studying about the laws of an Ir Hanidachat, of a city that was led astray. And again, it's not regular to find such a law. It's actually the only law in the Torah which it puts everyone into one communal entity of a sin that they did, and without differentiation. At a certain point, once we see that the most of the city has done this, in regular, every person is accounted on their own for what they did according to their deeds. But that is the chapter of Rambam for today, and we will see you tomorrow, where we will be discussing the laws of a person who proselytizes to a certain individual, and one individual goes and serves idols. What is the law then? So we will see you tomorrow. Have a good day in the meantime.